is no other island that's as isolated as Easter Island. Until now, we'd thought that the Rapa Nui, the people of this tiny Pacific island, had killed each other in a quest for survival about 300 years ago. But recent findings have invalidated this scenario. At the end of an incredible journey around the 5th century, this Polynesian people landed on this volcanic island of just 25 kilometers long. Here, for nearly a millennium, the Rapa Nui developed a unique cult of worship, for which they carved, transported, and erected these stone colossi called moai, some as high as 9 meters tall. As the Rapa Nui population grew, they deforested more and more to gain arable land. It was an ecological disaster, and we thought that this led to their disappearance. Great scenery, but it doesn't resemble Polynesia. There's very little forest, no palms. In reality, the island suffered a large deforestation, and as a result, the soil was destroyed. Agriculture declined, famine occurred, war, and during those wars, the moai were possibly tipped over, causing the destruction of these great statues. This is what we call the theory of suicide from ecological collapse. One of my colleagues, Nicolas Cauwe, came to Easter Island to conduct a new study, and the results it yielded give us a totally different version of history. Nicolas Cauwe is one of the world's leading specialists in Easter Island's archaeology. For 15 years, he has taken every argument for the ecological suicide theory and confronted each of them with his discoveries in the field. So, Nicolas, concerning this widely accepted consensus of ecological suicide, when you arrived here, what did you think?
I agreed. The idea was smart enough, and it was a possible explanation of what happened on Easter Island. But we found lots of things in our excavations which didn't correspond at all to the idea, so we had to take it apart.
But when we see a landscape like that, it's hard to imagine that there was no deforestation.
Deforestation occurred, but today we can no longer say that this deforestation caused a disaster on Easter Island.
According to the theory of ecological suicide, the Rapa Nui deforested their land so much it became impossible to farm, causing a famine in the 17th century. Yet, today, Nicolas' research reveals traces of intense farming during that same period. He has studied farming villages like this one.
This is called an are penga. Are is home in Polynesian, and penga are carved blocks made from slabs. It's a house whose foundation is made of stone, and in front of the houses there are always beautiful terraces with pebbles. Here in the angle are 2 small blocks of penga marking the small corridor leading into the house. They used to go in on all fours. That was the principle.
They entered there. Can we go through there?
Today we'll go in from the side that was closed, but it does allow us to see the form and type of house. And you can see here a series of small holes perforated in the basalt slabs. These small holes held the wooden frame to make an arch, and they placed the beams into the base of this arch, which closed the roof completely. And it was covered with plants to make it completely waterproof and habitable. But they were dormitories.
Yes, dormitories, because it's so narrow you can't really live inside.
They didn't live inside, just slept here. They didn't have the same intimacy we do. It was just a dormitory for the extended family.
This house could accommodate dozens of people. But the most surprising is what archaeologists discovered nearby. Digging in this field, they found that to adapt to the deforestation, the Rapa Nui developed a unique agricultural technique.
It's really surprising, but this is a field for farming. Today we think, how can that be if it's filled with stones? We think farming requires clearing the stones, but no, these stones are deliberately concentrated here. We've done surveys to find all the cultivated soils here. It was real farmland.
Can we look closer?
Okay. Here in the field, walking is complicated. But look, there are templates on all these rocks. These stones are natural. We find them everywhere in these landscapes, but they were concentrated here. You can see that creates an advantage. Today we have a little sunshine, and we already feel the heat in the stones. Basalt absorbs heat well, and the first advantage is it prevents thermal shocks between day and night temperatures. The stones maintain a more constant temperature, and above all, help concentrate moisture. Morning dew will be captured and will remain concentrated at the plant's base. It works well. We see plants growing here. They find all the moisture, and they're beautifully rooted, wedged between the rocks. And the last extremely significant advantage, the first is temperature, the second moisture. The third is that these pebbles replace the forest field to prevent erosion.
Meaning that even if deforestation occurred, it doesn't mean there were no resources. On the contrary, they were resilient and kept farming.
These stony fields are everywhere on the island, so there was intense agricultural activity. They likely knew how to feed a very large demographic. You must imagine that these people, instead of collapsing and disappearing, adapted to their circumstances beautifully by demonstrating an impressive resourcefulness.
By studying pollen in the soil, Nicolas' team created a virtual model of these fields. They determined that the inhabitants cultivated sweet potatoes, yams, and bananas, plants with high nutritional potential. To support this hypothesis, the anthropologist Caroline Poulet in Brussels, and working with Nicolas, studied several dozen skulls found on Easter Island.
Concerning malnutrition, for example, we studied the teeth of skulls from Easter Island to see if they have hypoplasia of teeth enamel. These are the enamel growth arrest lines. At some point, as the individual is malnourished, the enamel becomes thinner, and we can see this line. We observed this indicator for Easter Island, but in proportions that are quite similar to others seen in the Polynesian islands. The conclusion of the research is that from the skeletal standpoint, we have no evidence of a malnutrition disaster or catastrophic famine on Easter Island.
The theory of ecological suicide falters. The Rapa Nui didn't have to kill each other for subsistence. But did a fratricidal war nonetheless lead to the destruction of their civilization? At Ongaroa, home to Easter Island's 4,000 inhabitants, Nicolas takes us to the Archaeological Museum. It contains many artifacts that up until now archaeologists took for spearheads, weapons of war. Nicolas has restudied them.
Voilà, regarde.
Let's take a look. These are the famous objects called mataha, shown for the first time in late 19th century by an American researcher who called them mataha because he thought this word meant spearhead.
This was considered evidence of a fratricidal war?
Yes, one proof, but it poses a series of problems. When you have pointed weapons like this one with a small point. Here's another smaller one. But the problem is that we have a series of other forms which are difficult to attribute to spearheads, like this one, which is very wide and asymmetrical, heavier here than there. Here's another totally asymmetrical one, with the point on the side.
If they're not spearheads, what are these obsidian objects?
We started studying them, and we found tiny marks made from their use. Two things differentiate them. First, the action to scrape or to cut, or second, the action to throw it. We found that most objects were used to scrape and not to throw. Clearly, they created different tool types. And if they made a spear, there was no reason to change the technology, especially to get totally useless forms. Tools of the first category were made the most, with their specific form. And there's no reason to classify all these tools in the same category. Maybe these tools were for woodworking or for farming. That doesn't mean that there were no weapons, but the importance of weapons on Easter Island has been exaggerated.
This undermines the idea of a great war that decimated the entire island population.
Yes, exactly.
But this study is not sufficient to prove there was no war between the tribes. Conflicts can leave other traces, traces of destruction, for example. These statue platforms, called ao moai, are standing today, but they've been lifted back up into place. Yet when archaeologists first arrived on the island in the 20th century, they were all laying flat. These hundreds of statues installed along the shores were highly symbolic for the Rapa Nui tribes. They represented the deified ancestors and were set with their backs to the sea, facing the villages, to protect the villages. According to the theory of ecological suicide, during the battles that raged on the island, some tribes overturned the moai belonging to enemy villages, depriving them of the protection of their ancestors. Does this explain their condition today? To check, Nicolas studied these moai carved into the tuff, a very friable rock. Surprisingly, they are undamaged in one solid piece. According to Nicolas, these moai could not have been brutally tipped over onto the ground. If they'd been tipped, because the tuff is fragile, there would be moai pieces everywhere.
They'd have flattened noses. Their forehead is intact, yet it's the first thing that touched the ground, so a shock would have destroyed the forehead. There would be moai pieces, which is not the case. They were laid down whole.
If I follow you, this is not the result of destruction. Great care was taken to lay the statues down, and then they were covered up.
The goal at some point was to stop the roll of these monuments, but with respect, because they were the ancestors. So they laid them face down carefully and then enclosed them.
Not a trace of war then.
Exactly, nothing was broken.
But why did they intentionally lay these moai down? Is there a connection with the end of the Rapa Nui civilization? To understand this, Nicolas takes me to the Ranu Raraku volcano. The volcano is located on the east of the island. It was the quarry where all the moai were carved before being transported, presumably using logs, to the coast. On the volcano's slopes, dozens of moai are positioned strangely, as if they were abandoned, and the erosion of the volcano partially covered them. But archaeologists have proven this positioning of the moai was completely intentional. Dig sites at the volcano show that these statues do not only have a head, but also an entire body buried several meters deep. They are convinced that these moai were dragged into pre-dug holes. The foot of each statue is then embedded in a base. According to Nicolas, no doubt is possible. These moai, dated from the 17th century, near the end of the time of the Rapa Nui, were erected here with a purpose.
Another phenomenon we must understand is that the tuff color changes rapidly when exposed to weather. When you work with tuff, it has a beautiful yellow color, and once it's exposed to weather, it becomes a dark gray. Studying these statues, we realized their entire bottom was still that beautiful yellow color with no traces of rain. So they were buried at once.
Immediately after being carved.
There's no deterioration. If erosion was the cause, the lower base would be preserved, and further up we'd see more and more degradation. But we found a perfect line, above affected by weather, and under perfectly preserved.
So they were carved with this in mind. We will bury them here.
Exactly.
This discovery has long puzzled archaeologists. Why, if for centuries they had transported the moai to the coasts, did the islanders decide about 300 years ago to plant them only meters from their quarry? It appears the Rapa Nui wanted to signify something here. A little higher up the volcano, these statues help to better understand. At first glance, they may seem unfinished.
The situation is absurd. That large one's body is barely carved. The head is exposed, but it's placed against a cliff that was a wall of the quarry. If you wanted to finish it, you'd have to turn it around and dig into the cliff. So why, when they began this statue, did they then start another just in front of it? If they wanted to detach a statue to transport it, they wouldn't start all these statues at the same time. So this statue is not unfinished. It actually wasn't meant to be finished. If you want to extract more tuff, you'd need to destroy these unfinished figures. And in Polynesian traditional societies, destroying a human figure which is inhabited, filled with mana, is unthinkable. So they had a new goal when they carved this. They didn't want to extract the statues from the volcano, but to occupy the quarries, creating a new art of wall making.
Here are other gigantic moai nearly 20 meters long, impossible to be transported given the fragility of the rock. There is one in each size category. As if they wanted to use all the available tuff to prevent the creation of new statues. Furthermore, according to Nicolas, the moai buried at the foot of the volcano form a barrier, like symbolic guards preventing any new statues from leaving. Nicolas has identified a second barrier of this type, this time inside the crater.
I get a knot in my stomach every time I come here. It's a miracle. This place is out of the ordinary. You see here a smaller replica of what's on the outside. Again, they are buried with up to 2/3 under the ground. And we also see the small quarry behind with partial, mainly unfinished statues.
Tell me, Nicolas, if you put all of this end to end, how do you interpret all this?
I think that they put a taboo on these quarries, a forbidden zone. Taboo, it's a Polynesian word we all know. And here they created a taboo on their ancient activities, a taboo on using the quarry. They did everything to close off this quarry with unfinished statues, a barrier in front of the lower standing statues. So they sealed off the possibility to exploit the volcano anymore. And at this time on Easter Island, values were changing. Clearly the old values lost value. So they were in a hurry to close off everything that represented those old values.
And no more moai will be carved, here or elsewhere.
Exactly.
By the late 17th century, the islanders put a taboo on their cult of worship. But that doesn't mean the end of their civilization. Nicolas thinks they just changed their gods. This understanding emerged as he found representations like this one all over the island. This is a Polynesian deity named Makemake. According to carbon dating tests, archaeologists found that the Rapa Nui carved these figures at the end of the time of the moai.
Here we're in a new phase of history on Easter Island with the god Makemake. We have one here and one there. We clearly see the small eye cups, the drawn nose, his face with a rather massive forehead and a goatee. This is called a raised sculpture because material around is taken away to reveal the design. Apparently an ancient god was invoked. It's certainly not a new creation for the moment. He was simply given a new role. He was called back to be given something new to do, to manage the society. At the same time, they began to disassemble older monuments and close off older traditional values. So the ancestors were replaced and other values were called upon.
So here we have a petrified testimony to a transition. Before, they mainly worshipped their ancestors in moai form. Now everyone will worship the great god Makemake.
Makemake, who was soon represented everywhere and always in two dimensions, while the moai were much more spectacular.
This spiritual transition revolutionized the traditional lifestyle of the Rapa Nui. But this is not enough to explain their disappearance. While undergoing great changes, another event arrives and it changes everything. The arrival of Europeans on Easter Island.
In the 18th century, a few boats arrive, but they don't stay long. Things go relatively well, but in the 19th century, there's a genocide, first through slavery and then diseases that are imported. This ending isn't caused by deforestation or land management. It's caused by an encounter with the outside world, which was extremely painful.
I remember your first voyage in 1999. Now, after 15 years of research, what conclusions do you draw about Easter Island?
I have two. The first brings me a lot of emotion. These people had a lot of courage to rebuild a culture, even after the terrible years of the 19th century. It was not the same as their past culture, but nonetheless based on the memory of their past. I find that courageous, especially saving their language. That's impressive. But in relation to my research, I'd say we're often wrong creating lessons from history, as lessons from history often place our current values into the past, and we interpret the past from that angle, which doesn't help us much. The lesson we created with Easter Island saying, look what they did to their island which led to disaster and look at what we're doing to our planet today, is a bad example. In reality, after the work we've done, me and many others find that following the deforestation and change of environment, instead of destroying their world, they actually adapted to it. So the true lesson from this story is that the Rapa Nui suddenly found themselves in a much more complicated environment and learned to adapt.
Food for thought.